Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I am Ben Blanquera with Rackspace Technology, the world's leading multi-cloud services provider. Today, I have the pleasure of talking to Caroline Carruthers. She's a data cheerleader, author, CEO at Carruthers and Jackson. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, Caroline.
Good morning, Ben. Thank you very much for that intro. How are you doing?
Good. How are you today?
Very good. All the better for seeing your lovely face.
Oh, it's all better seeing your lovely place. And, to me, there's nothing better than waking up with an English accent. I mean, like, my day's complete at this point.
Well, in that case, we'll make it better for the rest of the day.
All right. So let's get right to it, Caroline. Tell us a little about yourself, your company, and your folks. I mean, you have the coolest title on LinkedIn, Data Cheerleader. I mean, like, tell us about
it. The cartoon that sits behind it with pom-poms and everything as well. If you're going to embrace a persona, then you got
to own this. You got to own it.
Definitely got to own this. So I feel like when you start listing all my titles off, I should put partridge at the pear tree at the end of it. It just kind of goes on.
Yeah.
But I guess first and foremost, I love solving problems with data. That is what gets me up in the morning. That's what I get really passionate about. And I guess that's where the data cheerleader title comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Secondary to all of that, I'm also an author. So I'm the co-author of the Chief Data Officer's Playbook and Data-Driven Business Transformation. One was written very much for data leaders who understood it and almost got the joke. And the others were for the book that they handed to their CFO and went, we just want to do that. Okay, please let us do that. So it's for the non-data converts among us to bring them to our side and help them understand all the wonderful things we can do if we get data right.
Mm-hmm.
And then Carruthers and Jackson, we basically help organizations around the world do the things that we talk about in the book. So we work with them as a strategic consulting partner. We help them understand where they are on their journey, where they need to get to fulfill the kind of ambitions they're doing with their business strategy, and then connect the dots. Nothing more complicated than that.
Oh, that's fabulous. Then I was doing a little bit of research on that, Caroline, and so you've grown up through the ranks of being a CDO and things like that. And tell me a little bit, like, what do you love about solving problems with data? I'm just curious.
Well, because I think it solves the root problem. I've in my past, the dark and distant past, I've been a CIO and I've been a CTO, and at this point in time, I feel like I'm just collecting chief titles for a laugh. But I promise, like, I'm done for a bit. And when I was a CIO and CTO, I was running these big programs, we were making differences, but I never felt like I was getting at the root of the problem. Because and I think for me, the dawning realization was that actually data was the root. So I could put the newest technology in place, I could create everything you can ever imagine, but if we weren't getting the data right, we weren't really solving the problems. We're only tackling 50% of the problem.
Gotcha.
And that's why I get so excited about the data, because I feel like I'm getting really to the heart of it. And there is many wonderful people out there who can tackle the technology, but I don't think there's as many of us that can really start and tackle the data. And a lot of what I do is try and encourage more people to come to the data side and balance that scale out.
Oh, so come to the good side of the world, the data
Go
side.
to the light side.
The light side. Okay, there you go. All right, let's get a little bit more into the CDO world. So, one of the key roles of a CDO is the governance of data.
Yes.
Sexy term, right?
Totally.
Can you share a little bit about some of the pressure CDOs are facing with respect to regulatory compliance? What are some of those regulations?
So I think when it comes to the role of the CDO, I think it actually mostly started, from my experience, from the regulatory and compliance point of view. So a lot of CDOs came through the sort of finance markets and regulatory compliance. I think now there has to be a bit of a balance between the regulation and the value add side, which what I would technically call the whizzy bang side of the data.
All right.
But we can't forget that when we've got people shouting about AI and ML and all the wonderful things it can do, the compliance and the regulation has to be there. Otherwise, we're not fulfilling our role. I think it was like a pendulum. So you have to address both sides, but your basics have to be there. So when it comes to things like regulation and compliance, the obvious ones that spring to mind are things like GDPR, across in the UK and in Europe. And I think in America, it's the California Consumer Act is the one that springs to mind as the most prominent.
Yep.
I think at the heart of both of those, they're incredibly similar. And the point is to make sure that we can look after people's personal data. And that's something I think that we should be fundamentally trying to do anyway. We shouldn't be relying on regulation to teach us morals. That should be sort of the red line that we shall not cross. But there's an awful grey area before we hit that line that as CDOs, we should be thinking about to make sure we're doing the right thing.
So you're suggesting that the CDOs at this point, doing the right things, I mean, you're literally a caretaker of this data.
Yeah, you're not responsible for everything because you want the rest of the organization to help you on this journey. But what you should be is the guiding light for your organization to help them know how they should be doing it right. And obviously put the safety controls in place. It's a bit like you're encouraging them to bowl, but you put the barriers up for them so they can't tip over the edge.
That's awesome. So let's unpack a little bit more about GDPR and this CCPA. Could you get a little bit more granular about when we think about these, what kind of investments have to be made? You know, what's sort of I've got to be able to do this, so I have to invest in this sort of scenario.
So I think, I mean, governance is obviously the easiest one to highlight.
Yeah.
And a bit like you said governance is sexy with a little laugh. I get that. Because often when we talk about governance, you see the white of people's eyes and they're like, please, do we have to talk about these kind of things? And I just think that things like governance and regulation have got a really bad reputation, governance especially. It's termed in a way that people think it's about stopping you doing things. Whereas I like to think about governance much more as about making sure that everybody understands the rules of the game that we're playing when it comes to data, and that everybody knows the game and wants to play it safely, healthily, and ethically. And if you frame it like that, it's a bit more positive than about stopping you doing things.
Right.
And I think when it comes down to regulation, all that has happened when we talk about the regulation is that somebody's put in black and white in rules the absolute limits of that game. When it comes to our role, surely, if you think about it, any soccer, forget the transatlantic nature, soccer coach would know that actually the coach and the team captain are playing within the rules, but they've got different strategies on how they win the game.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the difference between the governance side and the regulation side. One has to be within the other, but they're both trying to do the same thing, just not necessarily in quite the same way.
All right. So regulatory establishes the hard boundaries of thou shalt not do this.
Exactly.
Governance is within this playing field.
This is how we think we're going to win this game.
I got it. And then, I talked to some of my colleagues that are on the technology side of complying with GDPR, and there's some pretty complicated technology to make sure you're logging who can see things, who can move things, the ability to remove things. Can you chat a little bit about some of the sort of technology things that have to be put in play to comply with these things?
I can. I mean, I think one of the interesting, and sorry, Ben, I keep going slight off on tangents. You'll figure this out in the next half hour.
We can go back
again. One of the interesting things about GDPR, and I think it happened with the California Consumer Act as well, is that when it was first introduced, everybody felt like it was a project to be completed. And they had to put the new technology in place and had to put the new process in place. And then it was like, tick, we've passed the line, we've hit it before the date came in, and we're all fine. And actually, it isn't a project that ever gets completed because there's always new data, there's always new ways of working, there's always new things. Right. So these aren't projects to be completed. These are changes that you should be making to how you use data in your organization to make that you constantly stay safe. So that was kind of something that I wanted to make sure we talked about.
Yeah.
When it comes to things around the actual technology side, a lot of it comes down to, do you understand where your data is coming from, where it's going to, and what's happening to it on that journey? And importantly, who's doing it?
Who's doing it?
Who's in, I think we tend to get very wrapped up in highly technical language. And this is why sometimes we struggle explaining to the business what we're trying to do. So if we need to make it get down to the basics and the nub of what we're really trying to do. Essentially, that's what we're trying to do. Where's it coming from? Where's it going to? Who's doing what to it on that journey? And I guess flipping across to the value add side for a second, say, how could we speed the process up? How could we get more value from it? As an example of something. And a lot of these technologies, that's what they're trying to do, that we needed to put in place in terms of things like GDPR. It was about helping us understand that. And I find it fascinating as a data person now that that wasn't the kind of thing that we were really focused on before. That regulation shouldn't have been about helping us do that. It solved so many more problems than just making us compliant with regulation. Actually, knowing where our data is coming from and where it's going to gives us a really good picture into our organization and how we can do more with it.
Well, I think that's really sort of a good point to pull a thread on. Having the discipline and having the right governance and knowing where everything is and what's happening actually can give you more possibilities on the offensive side of doing things with data, right? Like, oh my God, we have this, we can move it this way, this quickly. And I mean, those I would think by having good data governance and sort of regulatory, by default, you now have those practices in play.
I mean, one really incredibly simple, but I think quite powerful example is an organization we worked with a few years ago. Big organization, and was buying lots of data in. You start the process and you ask the very simple question at the beginning of the data value chain: where's your data coming from? And where it was. Now, bear in mind, this was one organization, but like so many other big multinationals, they've got lots of departments, lots of different parts, don't always know the left hand what the right hand is doing. I'm sure that doesn't happen to anybody who's listening to the organization, ever. But long story short, we discovered that 5 different departments were buying an incredibly similar data set. I mean, to the point of it was 95 to 96% similar data set from the exact same company. Of course, the company weren't fessing up that they were supplying.
Of course not.
Of course not. Why would they? But by renegotiating, we're not buying it 5 times, we'll increase the data set so everybody gets everything they want, and we'll buy it once, and we save the organisation £4 million per annum.
You became a really value-added partner with
at
that point.
I think we made our money on that one. I think it was.
That's fact. I mean, that is actually such a really profound thing to realize. This isn't, but by being compliant, regulatory compliant, one could think about it as it's just a wasted cost because you have to be regulatory. But actually, it sets a foundation up for it to be on the offense.
It absolutely does, and it gives you that good foundation to be able to see further, faster, quicker.
Yeah.
I think that one of the biggest detriments that we do a lot in the data space is that we almost buy into the narrative that we can't justify putting good governance in place. And I actually think it has to have a value. We have to, as data people, demonstrate the value that we provide in that area. That's for the good of the whole organization, to be able to really justify our existence and gain that goodwill and commitment to keep transforming and keep moving forward.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of you talked about football, and I spent years playing football, European football, and I just remember being in practice for hours, like doing the basic drills. And you at the moment you think this sucks, but then you realize unless you do the basics really well, you can't move at speed.
And that's exactly it. As soon as you get the basics right in any organization when it comes to data, you move so much faster. Data isn't there to solve the problems on its own. By the best will in the world, data is just a pile of bits and bytes and nibbles and that's what it really is. It's about using it for us as human beings to see faster, make decisions quicker, elevate our thinking and our problem solving ability.
It's been fantastic, and we've got a conference coming out. You got to come out here. I've got a big conference in July. It's a Data Connect, and it's focused on. It started out with a Women in Analytics conference, and
amazing. I would love to.
Come on out to this side of the pond.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you, Caroline, for joining me today. Please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews. It's been fabulous.